Alrighty, so welcome everyone. It's so exciting to have you all here. So this event is being put on by Revolutionary Marxist students. We are a student group that's been around for about 2 years now, with our really main goal being studying revolutionary theory with students and then going out and putting that into practice in all different struggles that we see happening all around us. And we have dozens of chapters around the country, in the South, East, West, all over the place. Yeah, that's just kind of a very brief introduction to us as a group. And we've been trying to really stay on top of what's been happening at UPS and eagerly trying to struggle for a path forward and supporting militant workers who are really calling for a vote no on this tentative agreement. And just a bit about me, my name is Ari. I've been in RMS for around 2 years now, and I'm based in the Bay Area in California. And I'll pass it on to Sam, one of the other facilitators, to introduce themselves.
Hey guys, yeah, I'm Sam. I'm based in Boston, and just like Ari, I've been in RMS now for about 2 years, and I'm, really excited about this conversation. So I'll pass it over to either Audrey or Lenny, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
I can go. I'm Lenny. I'm a UPS worker. I'm a part of Teamsters Mobilize, obviously a Teamster too. And I'm very excited to be here. I used to be a part of RMS and I still talk with many in the organization, and I'm very excited to talk today. Audrey, you want to go?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Audrey. I'm a part-timer at UPS. I'm in North Jersey, also involved recently with Teamsters Mobilize. Yeah, and like Lenny said, I also was involved with RMS, still in touch with people there, very excited to be here for this event. And to talk about like what is the role of Marxists in this struggle, and more broadly in the labor movement. So yeah.
Great. And now that we've introduced ourselves, it would be great if folks haven't got the chance already to say hi to everyone in the chat, share, if you're part of an RMS chapter, which one, if you're a UPS worker, which local are you in, or if you're a worker or a student who isn't involved in either organization, feel free to share too. And also the conversation that the four of us are going to be having is going to be a discussion and also a presentation. So Lenny and Audrey, please feel free to chime in at any time when we're speaking. This is supposed to be pretty free flowing. And I see we have RMS folks from FIU and BU, UMass Amherst. And I saw earlier we have some Teamsters from Local 177, Local 70, really exciting stuff. We also have Dartmouth RMS students and Starbucks workers as well. Really exciting to have all of you here and to have folks from all over the place joining. And I also saw students from the League of Filipino Students who are here too. So exciting to have folks who are interested in working class politics and struggling against the folks oppressing us in all different ways, coming here together today. So Sam, if you could start us off with just trying to get at some broader questions we're thinking about with the role of Marxists in the labor movement.
Yeah, for sure. And just also as another thing, this might run long, but we are hoping at the very end to allow for some question and answer, if possible. So, if people have questions, throw them in the chat. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some at the end. But without further ado, so we're going to be talking about Marxists in the labor movement. And even just to take a step back, why are Marxists in the labor movement in the first place? As Marxists, what we're really trying to do is advance towards a revolution and ultimately towards communism when there's a classless society. But the thing is in order to actually be able to carry out a revolution, in order to be able to get to classless society, we have to understand that, as Marxists, we have to engage in the labor movement because the proletariat, the working class, is the only class that is consistently revolutionary, the only class in which that can really lead the force towards this revolution. And so, as Marxists, that means we have to join the labor movement. And we're discussing what the role of Marxists in the labor movement is, because there's a lot of confusion about how to actually carry this out. Because in struggle, we need to be advancing the consciousness of the working class in order to get them to understand that their emancipation is only possible through revolution. But the thing is that, how to do this isn't always so clear. And so part of that is that we have to actually be engaging in these economic struggles, in the struggle like the UPS struggle, in the fight for higher wages, for better conditions, all of those. And we need to be able to actually credibly lead those struggles and really paint the way forward of how to fight this struggle. But the thing is also as Marxists, we have to understand that, we can't just leave it as an economic struggle. We can't just limit ourselves to these bread and butter demands. We have to actually use the fight, use the economic struggle to further people's consciousness about the broader society. We have to get people to understand that, okay, it's not just that UPS doesn't want to pay workers a fair wage, but actually that it's, in the interest of the entire capitalist class to make sure that the working class is oppressed. And we have to use every opportunity to actually expose all the various ills of capitalist society in order to advance the need for revolution. And, this is so important because we're constantly inundated with bourgeois ideology, the ideology of the capitalist class that tells workers either, this is the best it's going to get, the system works for you, or if you see that this system doesn't work for you, tough luck, maybe you'll be a capitalist someday, maybe not, And if we're not pushing back against that type of ideology, we're going to fail to actually really play our role as Marxists well, and fail to actually advance the revolutionary struggle. And another thing about Marxists and the labor movement, okay, we need to be talking about more than just economic struggle. We need to be advancing things politically. But the thing is, it's like, when we're talking about this, we have to see clearly that we can't just be doing this as individuals either. I could go into a workforce and do all I want, but unless I'm actually part of a larger organization of people, this is not going to get very far. And so as Marxists, we need to be trying to, build up multiple levels of organization of a militant minority of workers that sees very clearly the need to be fighting capital tooth and nail, and is doing so in the workplace. But we can't just limit ourselves to, that militant minority of workers who see clearly that need. We also need to organize that intersection within that also sees very clearly, that has a Marxist perspective on things, that are actual communists. And communists themselves need to be organized, right? There needs to be a real communist party. And so, we're talking about all of this in, a broader context of what it means to be a Marxist in the labor movement, because, this is what I'm saying is somewhat basic in terms of Marxism. But the thing is that there's so much confusion, and even people who kind of nominally agree, okay, yes, as a Marxist, we need to be engaged in the struggles of the working class, and we need to be talking about revolution and all of these different various aspects of things. But in practice, we see very clearly that people are confused. They don't understand these basic lessons. And because of this, that's why we're having this panel discussion, is in order to actually try to get at what we need to be doing more clearly. And also part of that is actually understanding, the struggle right in front of us, this UPS struggle. And so before Lenny and Audrey actually explain that further, Ari's just going to talk a little bit about the fundamental basics of this struggle.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, so as people who live in this country, we can see that the current economic situation is a total mess in the United States. We're in a recession that the ruling class is scrambling to get together. And at the same time, they're also trying to figure out how to bring more necessary production back to the United States to be able to build up their economic competition with China due to rising inter-imperialist conflict between the two countries. And really, things are starting to fall apart for the ruling class. Inflation is skyrocketing because of their poor choices in economic management, and also just due to the fact that the very capitalist system of production leads to economic crisis over and over again because of its inherent inefficiencies and profit motive. And while all of this broader crisis is happening and the ruling class is already scrambling, now workers at UPS are, really starting to look around them and be like, what the hell is going on? And we've seen that, we have a worker here today from Starbucks, Austin. We've seen already there's been upticks of the labor movement in a few different areas with, workers at Starbucks unionizing, this UPS contract struggle looming on the horizon. And the ruling class is starting to get really nervous, and they can already feel that they're in a pretty, uneasy position right now with trying to keep the economy in check. So we have all of this broader context happening, and now we look at this pretty horrible tentative agreement that's been put on the table for workers. Why is it so horrible? Why do we have this tentative agreement that doesn't meet really any of the basic demands that workers were calling for higher wages, safer working conditions, stronger pensions, et cetera, et cetera? Really, it's because on the one hand, the leadership of Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, the president, and Zuckerman, the VP, are really in the pocket of the ruling class of this country and are working in their interest. And they worked hand in hand with the president, Joe Biden, with the CEO, Carol Tomé, at the top of UPS, to put this pretty horrible tentative agreement on the table instead of going on strike, because they wanted to avert the militancy of the workers. And there's a few different reasons why, the ruling class would want to keep a strike from happening. One is that UPS plays a key role in the US economy and actually moves 6% of the US's GDP, which is quite impressive. And also UPS, rakes in huge profits to the tune of $13 billion a year that are sliced up by all different members of the ruling class who are all shareholders in the corporation. But beyond that, there's a real political interest to crush worker militancy and for the ruling class to keep a hold on their political control. And, a more militant strike kicking off at UPS would really, again, and kind of inspire other workers and continue to build this uptick in the labor movement we're already seeing. So there was a real full court press by all different sections of the ruling class to push forward this TA, to try to foment a lot of mass support for voting on it. But to get more into the specifics of the dynamics at UPS, so every 5 years, there's a contract negotiation between Teamsters and UPS, and a potential strike has been talked about for almost a year leading up to that. And the last strike that happened at UPS was all the way back in 1997. And in the negotiation between IBT, the International Board of Teamsters, the union, and UPS, there was a lot of big talk from Sean O'Brien, the union president, and other top union leaders, really saying, we're going to get them, like, we're going to get the boss this time, like, we're going to go on strike, very militant language. But then at the last second, this TA is brought out. And now workers have from the 3rd, which is 2 days ago, till the 22nd to cast a ballot on this tentative agreement to either vote up the contract or vote it down. And if the contract is voted down, which is what we're calling for here today, to uphold the militant demand from workers who already see all the issues with this contract. If the contract is voted down, which it should be, it's a total sellout and betrayal of all the workers at UPS. If it's voted down, that means that the negotiations begin again. And then there's, even more threat from the workers because of that no vote, which can hopefully lead to more demands that workers actually want showing up on that contract, or the possibility opens up for a strike to happen. So that's a bit more of the mechanics, because I know we have some students here who might not be as familiar with how union negotiation processes work. And the comrades here have been part of the burgeoning Vote No campaign that is already starting to ramp up by workers who are organizing against the sellout of a contract. So it would be helpful if Lenny and Audrey, you guys could spell out a bit more of what exactly is the bullshit in this contract that has workers so fired up and why we need to be voting this thing down.
For sure. That was great, by the way. But yeah, so to start off, there isn't such thing as a fair contract, that's considering the fact that contracts themselves represent an agreement that the exploitation of workers will be maintained and just dictated by certain terms. But there is a difference between a good and a bad contract. And this is a bad contract. That take is in contrast to what people may have seen about, what the IBT is posting on their Twitter, saying that this is a historic win and a game changer for us UPS workers. What you may have seen CNN or Fox saying about this contract being a game changer and a strong contract for UPS workers. But in its content, many workers, including myself, have seen very clearly that this is not true. And both not just by its content, but also by the forces that are coming out of the shadows telling us to adamantly take up this contract, it is abundantly clear that this is a contract that is not in our favor. I'll start by just breaking down some of the shitty aspects of it and contrasting it with some of the stuff that the IBT has been saying. So a major rallying point for this contract was the elimination of a classification called the 22-4s. The easiest way to conceive of this classification is that it was just a class of drivers created after the 2018 contract that were underpaid and overworked. So imagine that there's a division within the camp of drivers that drive for UPS, some of which pre-2018 are better paid, have a better working schedule, and those that came in after 2018, shittier working schedule, underpaid, have to work overtime, etc. So the union was actually the one who proposed this. When I say the union, I mean the union leadership were the ones to propose this in 2018. And as we saw throughout contract negotiations, this was kind of made the rallying point of contract negotiations as a whole. But in and of itself, it was a rather weak demand, although it was necessary because this classification created a brutal, shitty existence for these drivers, their working conditions, their pay, etc. It was rather weak because it wasn't going to be much skin off of the back of the company, get rid of it. In their first lowball economic proposal, UPS proposed to get rid of this classification. So this just shows how meager the demands were from out the gate were the ones that were proposed by the IBT. But I digress. Now the IBT has been coming out saying that this classification has been eliminated. But if you look into the contract, you can see that the division between the 22-4s and the drivers pre-2018 contract, the better paid ones, you can see that the division isn't completely erased because there's still a division in terms of the scheduling, where now all those that used to be this underpaid, overworked classification of workers are going to be forced to work Tuesday through Saturday, while the other drivers will be able to work Monday through Friday. And so that has become abundantly clear after reading this contract. Along with that, the IBT has been talking about taking on Amazon, organizing Amazon, and defending against the gigification of the workforce of the logistics industry as a whole. But in this contract, we can see that they've just introduced the further gigification into the workforce. One of their rallying demands, which was a strike demand, was the elimination of the personal vehicle drivers. So, Amazon has this. It's basically that you can drive around in your car, pick up packages, drop them off, etc. Instead of eliminating it, they just expanded it in this contract. So now part-timers are going to be working as personal vehicle drivers, and they can bid into that come peak season, which is just holiday season. And then along with that, they've also added a provision that can make us work 7 days a week instead of the 6 that some people work if they do forced overtime, and the 5 that most work. So another just complete failure and complete lie on their part to say that this was a win for us, which they are saying that expanding the PVDs is a win. And lastly, at the end of negotiations, IBT was coming out saying that they're fighting for better wages for part-timers. They're fighting against poverty wages. This in and of itself was an attempt by the IBT to maneuver, to co-opt the anger that existed in the latter end of negotiations amongst the workforce. Because towards the end of negotiations, maybe a month out from the expiration of our contract, Sean O'Brien came out to say that they were fighting for $20. And anyone that had been organizing over the months amongst the part-timers and the membership as a whole for $25 saw clearly that their demand that they had been rallying around and creating petitions around was not being put forward at the table. And in the end, it became very clear through the wages that we got that not only was this demand never put on the table, but what was conceded to was something so far below what was even this bare minimum. And that $21 was being promoted as this immense gain that would be able to keep our heads above water for the next 5 years, which was an utter slap in the face. And so there was mounting anger at this contract after it was handed down to us. And this outrage was clear on social media, on any Teamster page, on any Facebook Teamster page, on subreddit pages, etc. And so, there were those that were clarifying the aspects of this contract that were just completely and utterly against us. The different lies that were being promoted by the IBT saying that we won this and that actually when you got down to the nitty-gritty of the language, their promotion of us winning these things was not true at all. And so then there were those that came out of this outrage that really desired to play a leading role in trying to oppose the propaganda swarming us, telling us to vote yes, that this contract is riddled with wins and things like that. And so those people culminated into a vote no campaign that is being promoted by the group that I'm a part of, that is called Teamsters Mobilize. And taking up this campaign, really not for the faint of heart. It's come with waging a battle against, leaders of our local international union that's claimed to represent us. It's looked like being met with intimidation when flyering the threat of losing our positions in the union for those that hold them and the like. And this is the same leadership that has come out to say that they're this progressive wave in the union. There's no question that this leadership, they're not revolutionaries, they're not advocating for the overthrow of the society, but that's not the question. The question is that, are they even leaders who are willing to fight for the furtherment of the economic struggle for workers? And does this contract represent that? Even if that means that they themselves believe in, the maintenance of the current society. And the answer to this question is completely and wholly in the negative. And that these leaders ardently stood in the way of unleashing the fight for a contract that could have even claimed to achieve half of the things they're saying that they had won at this point. And we're talking about leadership that claims to be very certain and confident that this is a historic contract in one breath. And in the same moment that they're speaking about that, they continue to use these different fear tactics to try to stomp out any dissent against the contract or any criticism of it. They claim to be the progressive wave that will let the membership decide, and yet they've deployed their whole organizing department across the country to convince the wider section of workers to vote yes without question. And this is the same contract that the company is telling us is a win, that the government is saying is a reflection of the ways in which labor and capital can work together to achieve great things. So if these things alone do not tell us, along with the contract language itself, that this is a crappy contract, I'm not sure what does. But ultimately, we have come to that conclusion, and that is why we were waging this Vote No campaign. And that is, ultimately the necessary role that we have to be playing right now as Marxists in this immediate situation.
Yeah, thanks, Lenny. I mean, as you've just been describing, it's truly just ridiculous. The lengths to which people have been trying to push this forward as a good contract, but then also just how obvious it is that this is a complete sellout. And I think it's really important for us to understand that this is a clear manifestation of class struggle. On the one hand, you have the working class, the UPS workers that are demanding higher pay, demanding a better pension, demanding these better working conditions. And on the other hand, you have the capitalist class, which in accordance to, their own interests is refusing to do those things. But the thing is like you also have all of these other class forces that are lining up with the capitalist class. Like you said, you have the government that's saying, vote yes, this is a historic contract. You have the union that's saying, vote yes, this is a historic contract. And you have all of the, various news media, CNN, Fox News, all of that parroting the same exact thing. And, obviously people understand that this is an economic struggle, that, yeah, the workers are fighting for these different wages, and that, the company doesn't want to give those up because it cuts into their profits. But it's important for us also to understand that, this isn't just about economics. It's UPS is refusing to do these things, not just because of their bottom line, and they're also not trying to avert the strike just because of their bottom line. This is also, fundamentally a political struggle, because, like in all class struggles, ultimately what this fight is about is what class is in power. And, the ruling class is actually desperately concerned about keeping their class rule. And, like Ari has already mentioned, the threat of a strike actually really, and the threat of actually a really militant working class movement is a real threat to the ruling class. And as such, they're really actually willing to forgo some profits in certain ways to push that down. Because again, it's fundamentally about them trying to maintain their class rule. And keeping a lid on that militant working class struggle is a key way of doing that. And another thing to really get at here is that in this class struggle, there's really no neutrals, right? You're either advancing the working class's interests or you're advancing the interests of the ruling class. And as such, in the struggle, it's important for us to understand who's on what side. How are the class forces lining up in this fight? And on that note, it would be really great for you guys to kind of explain a little bit more how exactly that's playing out. Maybe first talking about like, okay, what are the various positions of the ruling class, the capitalist class? Audrey, I don't know if you want to take the first kind of stab at that. That would be great.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, I think it's important to see, as you can see in this great graphic, that what UPS workers are up against, it's not just the capitalists like Carol Tomé and the people most obviously running UPS, but we are in a fight here against the whole of the capitalist class, all sections of it. UPS, when you're talking about who actually controls UPS, who has a stake and interest in what happens. So I have a few facts here about who actually is at the top in this situation. So Carol Tomé is not only the CEO of UPS, but she's also on the board of Verizon. Norman Brothers, he's an executive VP at UPS. He's on the board of the Atlanta Police Foundation, which has been strongly supporting Cop City. The UPS Board of Trustees who are or previously were at Heinz, IBM, Colgate, Palmolive, GE, Nike, the Federal Reserve, and many other major corporations and bourgeois institutions. And like any large corporation, the big institutional investors and finance capital firms have huge ownership stakes in UPS. So in our situation at UPS, this means BlackRock and Vanguard, which combined have, I think, $16 trillion in assets. So that gives us a little bit of a sense of how actually there's a lot of different sections of the capitalist class that we're up against here. And shows that, in these negotiations, the IBT leadership, led by Sean O'Brien and Fred Zuckerman, for all their kind of bluster and bravado about being militants and fighting for the workers, are really serving the interests of the capitalist class as a whole. And this, I have a bunch of quotes actually illustrating this point, which I think are helpful because it's been so much in the media of these kind of images of Sean O'Brien wearing the sunglasses, looking tough, that have been out on like all of the Teamsters social media, and that all the corporate media are recycling, and a lot of so-called progressive media as well. So earlier this year, O'Brien, when he was talking to the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, said unions are good for workers, good for the economy, and good for business. President Biden has been quite clear that his administration is built on the principle that a strong America relies on strong unions. And then he says, that he works with billion-dollar corporations like UPS, and we collectively work together. Why? To create jobs, but also to make their businesses as successful as possible. Because if their business is successful, our members are going to be successful. So this is like, the most blatant, clear rhetoric of trying to harmonize the interests of labor and capital, to say that actually the working class and the capitalist class can find an agreement. If the company does well, the workers do well. It's just capitalist ideology through and through. These are not the words of a labor militant by any means. And then also, I think it's important to see what role that the Biden administration has had in these contract negotiations, as well as O'Brien's rhetoric about Biden. He's called Biden the most pro-union president of our lifetime. That's pretty amazing, after we all saw Biden put pressure on Congress, which they happily did, the Democrats and the Republicans, to crush the potential rail strike last year. And I think in this situation, it's pretty clear that Biden and the Democrats they're obviously very concerned about the economic situation, which is clearly just getting worse, and also the 2024 elections. I think they knew that it would be too much for the government to directly intervene like they did with the rail strike last year, which is not impossible in this situation, by the way. They definitely can do that. But instead, they found a way for O'Brien to make sure there was no strike and to come to an agreement very agreeable to the capitalists. So they didn't even need to use any kind of outright government intervention. But it's been very clear, there's articles about it, that the White House was involved with these negotiations throughout in order to make sure an agreeable, fair contract was met. So I think this just really shows like what has been the aim of the O'Brien-led IBT leadership in these negotiations. It was never about fighting for the interests of UPS workers, to really wage a real struggle. They've made that clear actually throughout. And I think O'Brien, he comes from the old guard, the Hoffa regime. He was there, and he, in 2018, saw that there was mounting outrage at this very obvious concessionary contract that was mentioned earlier with the creation of the 22-4s and other things. So he saw this opportunity to kind of catapult himself to make a bid for union leadership. That's why he was saying all this stuff about militancy and fighting and all that. But as soon as he has been in power with Zuckerman, it's been very obvious that's not what they're there to do. They're there to continue for the IBT leadership to serve the interests of the capitalist class. And we need to see that clearly, and we need to wage resolute struggle against that in general, but especially in this situation where there's such an obvious sellout. So yes, that is a bit of an overview of like kind of the larger situation of the stand of and kind of position of various sections of the capitalist class in these negotiations.
Yeah, thanks for breaking that all down, Audrey, and I appreciate all the encouragement and messages people have been sending. It's exciting to see that other people are really feeling the same way about all this bullshit that the, class collaborationist union leadership is trying to push on the workers. And Lenny and Audrey, you guys had already been talking a lot about Sean O'Brien and Zuckerman, his vice president. And you know, from the cursory research I've done, a lot of their rise to the top of the union bureaucracy was actually propped up by this group, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, which was a reform caucus within the union and still is this reform caucus within the union that really seized upon the mass outrage workers had against the previous regime, which was the Hoffa regime, the prior president, who deep corruption, deep mob ties were just the, you know, the rule of law when he was union president. But you've already mentioned that while SOB has, you know, presented himself as an alternative to this, has been taking on a lot of the same methods of leadership, but TDU is kind of a new noun entering the equation here, I guess. So it could be helpful if you guys could break down a bit more of like, what is TDU? What are the class forces present there? For folks who don't know the role that this group has been playing in pushing Sean O'Brien to the top of the union.
Yeah, for sure. I also just wanted to respond to some things that Audrey was saying too, just because it's like, yeah, the example that Audrey was giving of like, you know, seeing his face plastered, Sean O'Brien's face plastered across social media, across these different news outlets, him wearing like the sunglasses and the jacket and, you know, telling the bosses what's up, you know. I'm sure people have seen the videos that have plastered the news as well of him fighting politicians and telling them that they're the kind of bosses that we're fighting, right? And you know, from the outset, I think he built his campaign, he built his facade, a lot of it on this strike threat for UPS, that he was going to strike UPS workers. But it was always riddled with the exception that we will strike if we have to. If you go on to the IBT website, you can see that when they go into their Q&A of just some basic questions that people have about the union, you can see that they really purport themselves as being a union that doesn't strike. 97% of the time, they don't strike. And meanwhile, he's saying all these things like, we'll take to the mats, we'll take to the streets, we'll kick the company's ass. It is very clear in many ways through his own, you know, promotion and quote unquote militant language that all of this is riddled with exceptions of if we have to, with the idea that UPS will strike itself, as in literally taking away the determinate force that the workforce can be in going on strike and truly promoting itself as a force against the company, and instead saying that no one really wants to strike. UPS, you're going to do it to yourself if it happens. So this guy reveals what he's about in the most subtle ways in his, you know, quote unquote militant language, but he also reveals it in the most obvious ways too. I mean, negotiations was the biggest performance of all. And in the last 2 weeks, I think, you know, if you've been keeping up with it, if you're a UPS worker, but even if not, I'll let you know, there was a lapse in negotiations that happened. Negotiations went till about 4 a.m., probably 4 weeks ago at this point, and then they collapsed. You know, UPS was pointing fingers at the IBT saying the IBT left the table. IBT was pointing fingers at UPS saying UPS is the one that left the table. But either way, their proposal was crap. And so we couldn't keep negotiations going on any longer. We're not going to return until they give us a better offer. Most people think that, and you know, what the IBT wants you to think is that those negotiations lapsed, that we all continued our practice picketing. If anything, it kind of heightened. And then those practice pickets acted as a force from below, causing UPS to put forward a better proposal for the workforce. That's not what happened. They had plane tickets ready to go, probably days after negotiations lapsed, for the date that negotiations would restart again in 2 weeks. It was a predetermined date when they would come back to the table. They had their hotels booked, their flights ready, and they made it seem like this was, you know, determined by the workforce, that we are the ones who brought them back to the table and we're the ones who got UPS to give us this contract. No, there is no doubt in my mind that there were talks happening outside of the negotiation room between UPS and Sean O'Brien, determining and deciding this contract that we got. So I think two things are worth seeing there. You know, we're poking at the militancy, the fake militancy of Sean O'Brien for one. And it's important to see that, you know, a lot of these things that were promoted as being like, you know, the organizing of the rank and files, what caused this good contract that we have is just utterly not true. And that this was very calculated, both the contract and the negotiations themselves. But also that, you know, this is all largely a distraction for not seeing the fact that our strike was averted. Why was it averted? For the very reasons that Audrey was saying, because it is within and has been within the ruling class's interest and the same interest that the IBT has been promoting to avoid strikes at all costs, to put a cap on our class struggle, to avoid actually unleashing the wrath that we have in our strength in numbers, to take to the streets, to weaken, you know, the company and the different economic interests and even the political interests that exist, and to truly be able to seize these different economic demands. You know, I mean, they want to create the image that organizing is what brought this contract to the table, and thus, you know, there was the force of the rank and file at play. Not only is that not true, but they're really trying to obscure the fact that this strike was averted, and it was averted for the interests of the ruling class, to secure them and to secure the ability for there to be no threat to, you know, the economic stake of these different interests, like the shareholders, the banks, et cetera, but also to the government itself, to the possibility of being able to inspire others across our class that they can also take to the streets. So I'm sorry for that long thing, but I think that it's just important to see that so clearly. And then you asked the question of TDU. I can get into that. So they're most egregiously siding with the IBT in the situation, and their vote yes push. So that may confuse some people. It definitely has confused people that I know who have been in this union for a long time, because TDU has been a leading force in the vote no campaigns of the past. So, you know, what's going on? Well, for one, TDU in many ways is the IBT, i.e. the leadership of the union. They have taken over the educational department for the IBT. So the same department that's producing these glossy papers that say that your contract is a win, when in reality it's a slap in the face. Those that are in the leading roles of TDU have really rode the wave into power as part and parcel, a part of the ONS regime. And so in that same vein, you know, they really are taking up the same outlook as IBT, promoting this harmony between labor and capital. There's divisions there. You know, we can't conflate the leadership of TDU with all of those that are a part of TDU, because, you know, there's a broad strata of people part of TDU. There's people that are concerned about this contract and are remaining rather silent in this situation. There are those that have seen TDU as kind of the only existing organ for being able to promote any change in this union, and are really let down by the situation at play here, with them just completely lining up behind the IBT to try to convince us that we should take an utterly bad deal. But I think the most important point is to just see that the whole of the organization, which is in a large part determined by the leadership, is in line with Oz. And we've poked at already the fake militancy of this regime. So I think the more important point to get at is that TDU was for the most part set on this path to just become an arm of leadership, merging with the overall kind of union structure, as opposed to fighting for the interests of workers and unleashing their further fight from the outset. They were built upon shaky foundation that really couldn't get beyond this very fate, and that could never really be developed into a determined fighting force for the union. Even at the bare minimum, unleashing the fight for workers to go on strike, get the necessary demands, et cetera. You know, at a certain point, they did play some role in doing that in 97. They have fought for various reforms, such as one member, one vote. So we, you know, absolutely cannot say that everything and all of the activity of TDU is superfluous and has always been on the reactionary side of the workers. It's not true. But the point that I'm trying to say is that its development into its utter reactionary role today has been from the outset determined by its shaky foundation, which was ultimately created by supposed socialists who took the lead in forming TDU. So just a quick little history, and to be able to explain this point, there were 2 Vote No campaigns that got started in Freight and UPS, and largely led by these socialists. They were then brought together in a convention to create the TDU. But the issue from the get-go that plagued really the line that would guide TDU and its development was that these Marxists really treated Marxism as the boogeyman. They very explicitly thought that the broad masses of workers were not ready to hear about Marxism. And so thus, there was not a Marxist analysis of the overall society promoted at the forefront of the organization that they set out to create. Instead, they believed that it made sense for the Marxists to just take a back seat and make this organization a stepping stone of sorts, consisting of a broad array of workers who were shielded from revolutionary ideas. And thus, this meant from the outset that those workers who claimed to have, an understanding of this class society and an understanding of, or at least trying to grapple with how to advance the struggle for workers in light of this, abandon their position as those capable of providing and exercising such clarity, and instead let bourgeois ideology just completely take the reins, which is what happens in place of not taking that leading role. So they abandoned their tasks as Marxists, and instead, this organization was fully susceptible to the most dominant opinions in different periods of time amongst the workforce. And then its scope thus was just reduced to that of, the trade union struggle. And thus its analysis was also reduced to that. So there was going to be no ability for TDU to be able to identify the fox in sheep's clothing that we see of the SOB today. They were never going to be able to identify the class politics and class position that he represents. And thus, it was going to be fundamentally and entirely possible for them to take a position in leadership, to get a seat at the table without actually having an ability to analyze, understand, or fundamentally disagreeing with the fact that this guy represented a force against workers. And so, they just could not fundamentally identify the lack of substance of even militancy, nor their, his fundamental kind of bourgeois position, is what I think. So, TDU today, they currently have been taking a position that is fundamentally against the workers in this contract struggle right now.
Yeah, thank you for fleshing that out more, Lenny, and really getting to the different contradictions with TDU. Audrey, did you want to add on more thoughts to this question as well of the different forces at play here?
Yeah, so just to add on to TDU, I think today, it doesn't even have that kind of Marxist sheen anymore. But I think one of the key issues with TDU is that those who founded it, it's not just like a kind of confused approach to like a Marxist line. I think it is a total rejection, actually, of some of the basic principles of Marxism. One very important text that I highly recommend by Lenin is called "What is to be Done?" And so, in that he discusses how it's the course of any trade union struggle, any spontaneous movement of the working class is towards trade unionism, which is not like a proletarian, like class conscious ideology or movement. It really is an ideology that fits within the confines of reforms within the existing capitalist system. You know, Sam talked about this at the beginning, like there's so much bourgeois ideology all around us in this capitalist society that we live in, coming at us from all angles, you know, from the media, from school, from work, our families. And so given that, there has to be resolute struggle to actually put Marxist politics forward, and in command. And people, you know, the working class is not going to like spontaneously come to a Marxist understanding, like a true class conscious understanding of the society, of the role of the working class in leading a socialist revolution, because there's so many ways that the bourgeoisie stops that from happening. I think we can all think of examples of that in our own lives. So it really is, I think, like a fantasy that TDU and other similar groups have of this kind of like self-activity of the rank and file. You know, if you just kind of support the efforts of the rank and file in various economic struggles, if you just add that up, somehow that's going to lead to a revolution. So yeah, I think just to say, I think really like that kind of idea is very much against what Lenin said, I think correctly, and what is to be done and other writing, and is not going to lead us to a revolution. So, okay, we've been talking about TDU for a while. Maybe I will just shift to like what forces out there are actually advancing this struggle. So as we've talked about, you know, there is outrage across the country of UPS workers who see that this is a sellout. Some people, I think, were already expecting that based on how O'Brien and Zuckerman have been acting, based on the negotiations, based on the fact that they kept us in the dark. They said we're going to be transparent, and then they did a non-disclosure agreement, just like previous IBT leadership. But I think there were also others who thought, you know, okay, maybe this is going to be different based on what like O'Brien is saying. And then once this came out, we're like, wow, you know, totally, this is a clear, bold-faced betrayal. So there is all this outrage. You know, Teamsters Mobilize was already organizing for part-time demands, specifically around the demand for $25 an hour to be the base wage for part-timers and other things, and was already kind of seeing the need for organizing a Vote No campaign in the event that demand and other demands weren't met. So I just, yeah, want to say, you know, that was already happening. And then I got involved more recently. I know Lenny did as well, but there are others even on this call who have been a part of that group and pushing that forward. So I was very glad to find the group Teamsters Mobilize and to get involved. I've been very inspired by people in that who were already in that, who've been joining it, who are taking a resolute stand here against this contract, which includes against the IBT leadership. And like I think Lenny said earlier, this is not like a fight for the faint of heart. You know, the leadership is coming after people hard, and they will continue to, and they'll try to smear people. But we know that, you know, we have to the wages fight, and we'll continue to. But so that's kind of what's going on. Is Teamsters Mobilize is leading this Vote No campaign right now, trying to unite as many people in that as possible, who are going to have different ideas about the contract, but we can agree that, you know, we absolutely need to, and we can fight for more. I think also it's important to see that there are contradictions here in the leadership. The leadership is not like a monolith where every person in leadership thinks the same thing about this. And I think in any struggle, it makes sense to have like tactical alliances that will advance the struggle in any given situation. So I think like in 2018, O'Brien, I think not because he cared about the UPS workers, but for his own interests, he was pushing a no vote at that point against that sellout contract. So I think in that situation, it made sense to have like a tactical alliance with him for that. But that's different from having like a more strategic alliance to say that, okay, O'Brien actually is the key to advancing the struggle of UPS workers. So I think it's important to see the difference between those things, and then to see in this situation, where are the kind of splits in leadership? How can that be used to advance this fight right now? People may have seen that in Local 89 is in Louisville, Kentucky. That's the local, first of all, that has like a huge UPS building. I think it's like, maybe people can chime in the chat. It's many thousands of people who work in the Worldport hub there. But that is the local that Fred Zuckerman, who's the General Secretary General, that's where he comes out of. And it was a pretty huge deal when it came out a few days ago that they were the one local leadership that had recommended a no vote. And yeah, that's big to say that, to stand against this tentative contract, which the IBT is pushing as hard as they can. But then after that, you know, the IBT definitely, you know, who knows what they did, but put a lot of pressure on Local 89 to kind of whip them into line. And then they said, oh, you know, actually, we weren't sure, but now we're emphatically recommending a yes vote, which is too bad. But it does show that there are these contradictions amongst the leadership. There's also a VP of the Southern region. I think he's an international vice president, John Palmer. And he's been speaking out against this tentative contract, saying that it is a sellout. It's clearly full of concessions, particularly that the leadership sold out the part-timers with this. And also that, you know, I mean, I know he's been involved with TDU, and he's said that, I mean, TDU has totally degenerated at this point, where they are just like a mouthpiece for the IBT leadership. So I think it is important to see in this situation, who are those amongst leadership that can be worked with tactically in this situation. And then also there are various Marxist groups out there who have been taking a principled stand against the tentative agreement, who say that, you know, O'Brien has sold us out in this situation. And, you know, these are groups that, like, I myself have various political disagreements with, but it's important that, like, we can unite actually in this situation on this. So that is I would say, like, a brief overview, maybe not so brief, of like what forces are actually pushing forward the struggle here. Maybe just one last thing to note, you know, there have been workers who are in other workplaces with other unions who have been reaching out, or who some of us have already been in touch with, to share their support and solidarity in our struggle. And we're gonna have some of those people on the various Teamsters Mobilize webinars. So I think that's very important too in this situation. Like, we are trying to build up more links amongst militants in the labor movement.
Thank you so much for the thoughts shared so far, Audrey. And I think we've already discussed here, you know, all the different forces in this fight and which side they've been choosing. And as Marxists, you know, we need to be eagerly engaging in the struggle beyond just condemning the contract for being a sellout and for being terrible. So it would be good to break down a bit more, like, how have some Marxist groups responded so far, and how do we think Marxists should be relating to the labor movement in this struggle? And this is a pretty big question, so maybe Lenny, you could start us off, and then Audrey, you could build that up a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, there have been many lines that have been taken by these, so to speak, Marxists in relation to this fight. There have been those that have been saying it's demoralizing to say that this is a bad contract. There have been those that have been saying that, well, you know, this contract is a reflection of where, you know, the mass of workers are at right now, so we just need to accept it. There have been the most egregious things of those saying that actually this contract is a reflection of the capitalist class bowing down to us. I hope that through the presentation of ideas that we've put forward thus far, that it's clear that all of those things aren't true. I mean, it's not demoralizing to say that this is a bad contract. It's objective to say that this is a bad contract. What's demoralizing is for people to say that this is a historic win when it's very clear that we're getting a slap in the face with this contract, that we're getting wages that won't keep our heads above water for the next 5 years, that we're getting pensions that won't keep up with inflation, that we're getting more workplace divisions than we had before, riddled in this contract. And the very idea that this contract is a reflection of where the workers are at right now, and so we should just shut up and take it, is in of itself a bourgeois idea, because what is it's saying is that there is no basis to fight. There's no basis for workers to fight in any situation, even in a situation like the situation in which we exist in society today, where there's not a high level of strikes going on right now. There isn't a high level of activity. There's a very, very low level revolutionary movement. And yet, if there is a bad contract, if it's seen clearly by workers that this is a bad contract, of course there is a basis to fight for more. That is not a question. And to deny that is to relegate this situation, this contract, the fight to the ruling class, and to allow them to be the ones that take the reins, take control, and allow this contract to get passed through. This is absolutely why we have to take a stand in this situation. This is why what's playing out right now is a class struggle, and why there is no neutral position in this situation as it exists right now. And that same line that's being promoted is the line that's overall influenced by this idea that the spontaneity of the working masses will create the ideas of, revolution, and then that through those spontaneous struggles, we will be able to get out of this wretched and oppressive society. I mean, history of revolutions, of revolutionaries and revolutionary movements have told us that this is not true. In absolutely no way, shape, or form is this true. That if you are a Marxist and you truly do stand by the principles of Marxism, and I think Audrey was saying this before, so I'm sorry if this is a reiteration, but if you truly do, then you must understand that the ideas that are prevalent in society and that are overwhelmingly kind of in our faces, that are most promoted in society are those of the ruling class, are those that say that we have to maintain this capital system, that you can't do nothing, that the best thing that you can do is sit down and shut up, and that you can't change your overall conditions. Those are those ideas that are most promoted. And within the trade union struggles, those ideas are also promoted. It's the idea that the most we can do is fight for bread and butter things, and that's as far as we can get. So if you say that as Marxists, we have a duty to sit on our asses, you're saying that as Marxists, we have a duty to allow the maintenance of this capitalist system to continue, and to allow these workers' fights to never get beyond the fight for bread and butter demands. That is what you're saying. In this circumstance, it's almost more egregious because they're not even taking up the fight for more demands. These people that call themselves Marxists are actually saying the best thing that we can do is just let this shitty contract go through. That is what they're saying. And so in the face of that, I think it becomes all the more abundantly clear why it's necessary to side on the side of vote no, to clarify both the aspects of this contract that are not within our interest, but to ultimately clarify the larger picture of the aversion of the strike for the sake of keeping a cap on class struggle, make clear the different forces that are set up against us, and ultimately try to instill in people a hope and a sense of the fight that exists right now for more in our contract, because there's no need to deny the basic reality that we have to show people that we can and should fight for immediate needs and interests. But in and through those fights, we have to show people that we can't stop at those fights for our immediate needs and interests under the capitalist society that is going to continue to erode away those demands over time. I think someone in the chat mentioned the fight for the 40-hour work week, 5-day work week, 8-hour day. Those have been completely eroded away, and we're seeing that in our contract, but we're seeing that across society as well. And it just goes to show the need to get beyond, to both fight for these demands, but also to really steel ourselves in the need and in the spirit of the fight for the overthrow of the society. I have some more things to say about, like, really, beyond just these, like, non-Marxist cloaked in Marxism that are promoting all these different lines in the struggle, what actually we as Marxists should be doing. But I'm curious, Audrey, if, like, you have any more thoughts on that, because I know there's a lot that could be said about these different forces that are kind of showing their faces right now and taking their position relative to this contract struggle.
I think what you said was great. Just the one thing I was thinking about from what is to be done is, Lenin talks about Marxists need to be leading the working class, need to be, in the form of a communist party, be the vanguard of the working class, which can then, the vanguard can be the working class can be the vanguard of all the oppressed, and exploited masses in a revolution. Vanguard, right? That means leading ahead, not like tailing, falling behind, just, following whatever the IBT leadership says, or whatever, some various UPS workers are saying, which is that this is a great contract and we're never going to get anything better. Or maybe if we can, it'll be in the next one, but we should be happy with what we have now. So just, yeah, I think that point about not tailing, but rather trying to provide leadership is very important. But otherwise, I think if you want to go on to talk about, like, what actually should Marxists be doing then in the situation, given these kind of negative examples, which show us what not to do.
I think one more point that we should make, I would do it. If you want to do it, you can do it. Is this point that I think G pointed out in the chat, about the postmodern approach here, and saying that, well, there's this one line that's like, how dare you tell workers they're being sold out and what to think, that's up to them to decide. And there's also the people that objectively see what's going on, saying that, and saying that the best thing that we can do is remain neutral in this situation, because we can't actually decide and say what's necessary for workers to do in this situation. Only they can. I think that is one to also clarify.
Yeah, if you would like to.
Sure. I mean, it goes along with this thing of the spontaneity of the masses that we were talking about. And it unfortunately is a line that has been taken up in a lot of different situations by some more kind of prominent, so to speak, kind of Marxist groups, as well as just, people that are on the fringes of the situation in our union too, being browbeaten for having opinions on the situation and taking a stance relative to the struggle. And it's tied up in this idea that we can't understand the objective reality playing out, that nobody is able to understand the objective reality playing out except for those that are most experiencing this given situation. And so because of that very idea that there actually is no objective reality, it's relegated to just purely identity politics, that it's only people in specific situations that wear specific identities that can understand what's truly playing out and can decide their own fate. If this isn't an abject rejection of the idea that we can all come to a fundamental understanding of the fact that we exist in a capitalist class society, that every idea is tainted with class politics, and that there is a way forward for the working class out of this society that takes into account the objective situation, a deeply materialist analysis of what's going on in a given situation, the different forces and what they represent, and a spirit and a will to fight and continue forward using the lessons synthesized through the history of revolutionaries, then I don't know what is an abject rejection of Marxism. This is the most egregious one that is tainted by these postmodern identity politics that are so prominent in our society today. I told a coworker who may be on this call or not this the other day, who was basically being scolded for having an opinion on the situation, taking a stance and making his stance public, that how would he feel if another worker had an opinion about his contract? And he said he'd feel just about fine because there are facts and they can be analyzed and anyone can take a position relative to those facts. But also the larger point that he was making was that, you know, how terrible is it to say that when there's genocide of Palestinians going on in Israel right now, that actually we can't say that that's what's happening and we can't take a stand with those people because we're not Palestinians. How disgusting is it to say, to deny the existence of oppression of Black people by saying, because I'm not Black, I can't say that that's what's going on in society. This is the equivalent of what these politics are promoting. And so in this situation, when it comes to, you know, what's going on with the contract, whatever, it's very clear through the explicit content of the contract up into the different ideas that and promotions of the ruling class of this contract and their blatant attempt to try to obscure what has actually been going on here with this contract, not only being bad, but with the fact that there was a complete aversion of a strike and that this has been within their interest from day one and has happened repeatedly to not just UPS workers, but workers across our class and throughout the society, that in this situation, you can say what you think is going on and that you can't stand on the side of what you think is right. And so, yeah, I think that it's a pretty egregious and aggressive way of trying to dispel the ability for there to be any mobilization across those that, you know, can identify what's really going on, across those that call themselves Marxists and call themselves stewards of, you know, proletarian politics, to really be able to further the working class struggle in this given situation or any. I mean, it's completely denying the ability for us to ever be able to do that as, you know, working elements across the society. Because if we can't understand the situation of another workforce outside of our own, how the hell are we going to make a revolution by being able to link up the workers across its class, to be able to have the class act as a class for itself in being able to achieve revolution? How the hell are we going to do that if we say that workers in another workforce can't understand the situation of workers in their same class and come to understand their general oppression? So that's how I would sum that up. I know that was kind of long, so let's move on.
No, Lenny, I think that was really excellent. You know, I think there's so many lessons that like are so clearly being missed that we really need to be taking to heart. You know, both the broad lessons from, you know, what is to be done about, you know, how we actually build up consciousness amongst the working class, but then also just like these basic things of like, is there like objective reality, and can we actually say, yes, this contract is bad, looking at the basic facts? I mean, it's somewhat unfortunate that we need to say stuff like that so clearly, but I think it is, you know, all of the points you were making really are driving that home. And I think it's, you know, essential for Marxists and frankly, kind of anyone to really see those things clearly. And, you know, we've talked a lot about some of the more broad picture stuff of, you know, the role of Marxists, but it'd also be good to talk about, you know, the concrete like next steps that we need to be thinking about, both in terms of this struggle, but then also in terms of really building up the labor movement and the revolutionary movement in the US. And it'd be great to hear from you kind of again, elaborating on that a little bit further. So if you want to take it back, Lenny.
You just want to talk about like concrete next steps? Is that what you're thinking?
About, you know, about both this, you know, combating the blatant like vote yes campaign that's being pushed, but then also, you know, about some further next steps of like, okay, you know, what comes after this? You know, we've talked about there's, you know, a lack of a communist party in the US. There's a lack of a real kind of organized militant group of workers in the US to you know, to break that down a little bit more. I think would be pretty helpful, you know, to hear from people who've been kind of, engaged in this stuff.
Maybe just really quickly, for this slide, because I think we've been touching on these points throughout, so I'll try to be like fairly brief. But I think it's important that in any struggle that, we can't limit the various issues we're bringing up to just that particular economic struggle. I mean, it's good to be talking about all the stuff with the UPS board of trustees or directors and the role of the government in really trying to squash a strike in this situation, some of the history of the IBT leadership, all this. It's obviously very important. But, to have like true proletarian class consciousness, the working class has to be able to respond to every outrage and injustice in the society and understand the class position of every class, not just the working class, also, the capitalist class, also the petty bourgeoisie. Oh, yes. And so, this quote here, it says like the Marxist ideal should not be the trade union secretary, but to be the tribune of the people. And so I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind, like that we have to be making exposures, raising these larger questions about all aspects of the class society that we live in. And like to be able to actually talk about what is the way forward for the working class, for the masses more broadly. What is the need for revolution ultimately? The fact that we cannot do away with exploitation and various forms of oppression within this existing capitalist system. So, I think it's really important to see like that difference between what a Marxist should be doing while engaging in different struggles, and what a trade unionist is doing, which is to say, get a fair contract, or we just, if we just got a stronger contract, then like that's kind of the end goal, or just really keeping the exposures in a struggle relegated to those within the labor movement, within the existing capitalist system. So just wanted to say that before I think Lenny will continue to talk about like what actually are our practical tasks now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Audrey. I think that was definitely helpful, and really, yeah, key to spell out again and again.
Just a little bit more on this, because yeah, the points that Audrey's bringing up are pretty key. We have to make these exposures in the economic struggles, the most acute struggles that are playing out, expose the way in which the class society is set up against us. And we need to also do that, make those various exposures outside of those immediate economic struggles. And we need to do that by, talking to people and trying to talk to our coworkers and whatnot and put these ideas forward. But that also can only go so far. We have to do it by having a systematic way of being able to put forward these ideas to people and doing that through propaganda, so that we can be able to make a series of different exposures and connect those exposures to the most immediate situation that workers are facing in order for them to be able to grapple with themselves, really, the need for revolution, how that relates to their immediate situation, to mull over the various concepts and the possibility of changing society and the like. But that also cannot just be grasped through reading alone. Workers need to learn through their own experience that revolution is ultimately the necessary course that we have to take. And we need to instill an unshakable, in the coworkers around us, with those that step forward as being the most active elements as well, instill an unshakable, determined belief that we can and will overcome capitalism, that we need to overthrow this oppressive society, and that this is the course that has to be taken. And we need to overcome the very overwhelming nihilism that exists, that we can't get out of this situation as it exists right now, that we always will be stuck in this economic and political system that's based in our exploitation and our misery. And in order to instill our coworkers with this hope that we can change our conditions, using the tool of history of revolutionary movements as our guiding light, they need to be able to see that in their immediate situation, through their experience, that this is possible. Because, revolution is just this incredible task. And so they have to see, and we have to show people that through their strength in their numbers and their unity, clarity about their friends and foes in a given struggle, etc., that we can change aspects of our situation. And so this starts from promoting like low-level struggle on the shop floor. This starts from, when you don't have water in your warehouse, getting a petition together, having people see that we need to be united in this circumstance, that we need to take a stand against management, and that can force their hand. And that's from those low-level struggles up to larger scale struggles, such as what's playing out here and now with the UPS struggle, such as showing workers that, look, this is what our contract is, but we don't have to sit down and take it. That, we have this vote, but we also have the ability to go public with our opinions. We have the ability to talk to our coworkers. We have the ability to flyer at other hubs. We have the ability to shift the tide, to really turn the tide if we have a determined sense of the need to do that. And an important point, I think, that a lot of the naysayers will use against us in this circumstance is that even if we lose this no vote, it doesn't mean that this no vote was incorrect to take up. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a basis to try to unite the dissent, the anger, the outrage that existed at this contract. Absolutely not. I think what it will show if we don't win this no vote is that the forces of leadership are far stronger than the forces that exist amongst the membership, that the forces of the organized militants, of those that really do want to unleash the struggle for workers, the fight against capital, that we ourselves, while we are mounting our strength, while we are getting organized in the face of this vote no campaign, and we are presenting ourselves as a force to be reckoned with, no doubt, that we are still fairly weak and still need to build up our strength. And so the basis for aligning with the vote no is to be able to try to show our coworkers that, look, we don't have to sit down and take it. But that doesn't mean that just because, we try our darndest to put forward the need to vote no, to see with clarity the fact that this contract is enforced, that it means that, this was ultimately incorrect, that this means that we can't change anything. I think a lot of my coworkers have this idea that even if we vote no, it won't matter. And it's possible that even if we vote no, this contract will still get pushed through. But we have to show people that it takes really determined and serious struggle in order to be able to turn tides as great as these. I think that there's a lack of history, really, of past labor movements that's missing overall in the consciousness of, a lot of the workforce, that in order to even be able to establish the organizations of unions, that took people that were willing to put their goddamn lives on the line, that knew that that was what was on the line in order to be able to achieve these units of organization for workers. This was the kind of struggle that was promoted, and it came with not just a trajectory of win, 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 but it came with struggle that at times took losses and gains, and was certainly not any sort of exponential or linear graph in order to be able to get to the unit of organization of unions. And so I think we need to show our coworkers through something like this Vote No campaign that, this is not an incorrect position to take, even if we will lose, that we have to do this in order to be able to build up the forces that we have on our side, which is our numbers, in order to be able to really, truly turn tides in the future, really be able to unleash our fight, and really be able to, on one hand, secure stronger contracts be able to raise up our demands and actually be able to win those things. But then ultimately to be able to show people through the practice of taking up the fight, that the fight cannot stop here. The fight has to be raised up to a higher level if we ever want to get beyond just having to continue to defend against the attacks of capital, in order to be able to get ourselves a few more dollars to keep our heads above water, keep from drowning. So they have to see through their own experience. We have to take up stances like we are in this Vote No campaign in order to do it. And even in the midst of maybe what might be a Vote No campaign that may not change the situation with the contract, that may result in the contract getting pushed through, in the end, there will have been organization of those that are, the determined kind of forces in the union that exist currently, that are willing to take stands for what they know is right, that are willing to push forward the fight for workers and do so with an unshakable faith that is the side, the correct side to be on in this moment in history. And for those people to be able to further develop their organization will only go to further the struggles in the future for workers. So those are some other points too that maybe tie into what, as well as tie into the next steps stuff. But I think there's more to elaborate on. So I don't know, Audrey, if you want to go.
Yes, I just wanted to share a quote that maybe people already know, but based on what you were saying about the need to struggle. So from Fred Hampton, he said, "If you dare to struggle, you dare to win. If you dare not struggle, then damn it, you don't deserve to win." And yeah, we need to struggle, in this situation and in general. Yeah, there's no way we can make advances, no way we can, make a revolution if we can't take a stand like here and now in this fight. And then I was going to just talk a bit about even further than the Vote No campaign, like what is needed actually for Marxists to be working towards. Yes, so okay, we're talking about what is the role of Marxists, of communists in the labor movement. We have actually a lot of history to look back on, which is important, like Lenny said. People have been so systematically denied some of the basic history of people's struggles in this country and of working class struggles in this country that are very important to really study and understand. So I think something that's quite an inspiration for us, something we should kind of look to be forming, is something akin to the TUEL, or the Trade Union Educational League. So this was started in the early 1920s by labor militants who were really waging the fight against capital in the face of very reactionary union leadership that was trying to squash strikes and unionization efforts. That was, that reactionary union leadership was in the AFL, American Federation of Labor. So the TUEL was formed because these people saw the need for an organization of militants to actually be raising the consciousness of the labor movement, of the working class in the labor movement, to actually be leading struggles, and to be able to wage these struggles against, reactionary union leadership, which was objectively holding back the working class. And so this organization of the militant minority was formed, drawing together all these militants that were kind of scattered, disparate, fighting, but unorganized, into one organization. And this was an organization that spanned across unions and industries. So I think this is really something that we should be looking to form. I think, those of us who are working at UPS, who are in the Teamsters, should be trying to work with others to lay the groundwork for this type of an organization within the Teamsters. But this is something really we should be trying to broaden, to be an organization of militants across the entire labor movement. And I think it's important also to see that like this kind of an organization, it was actually incredibly successful in advancing the labor movement, in advancing working class consciousness, and fighting some of the strongest, bravest fights that we've had in the labor movement. And the reason I think that they were able to do that is because it was led by members of the Communist Party USA, which I think was a real communist revolutionary party in this period. And there is a need for that, for a Communist Party to be formed, an organization of professional revolutionaries who making revolution their life's work, to work to advance the revolutionary movement. And a huge part of that is by advancing the working class struggle. This is a picture, I'm fairly sure, of the convening of one section of the Communist Party, which they ended up merging. There's some great stuff that people should read about this history. It's very important. There's a good book also by William Foster, who was actually one of those labor militants who formed the TUEL and who went on to join the party and be a leading member, leader of the Communist Party for a period. So he has a book From Bryan to Stalin about kind of the history of the labor movement, which I think is very good. And maybe RMS can work to put together some materials or something that people can look at to learn a little bit more about this history. But so I think, there's a need for a militant minority organization in the labor movement. And there's a need for a Communist Party. And I think it's also only with a militant minority organization to be able, only if that exists can the labor movement really be brought to a higher level, for there to be really, more clarity in militant actions taken, strikes waged, etc., to be able to rally around the larger groups, masses of workers. Of course, we need kind of broad oppositional progressive organizations, campaigns, formations within the labor movement, but we do need a group that's able to lead the broader sections of the workers in these struggles, that has clarity, that we can't just kind of collaborate with the capitalists to come to some kind of fair deal. And I think it's important to see that there's not a linear mechanical progression, build the Communist Party. Communist Party builds the militant minority organization. Militant minority organization leads, larger struggles for kind of progressive reforms or movements. Rather, these are all things, that we should be aiming to build up. But I do think it's important that as Marxists, we prioritize, the formation of a militant minority fighting organization to be able to lead the rest of the labor movement. And also over that, prioritize the formation of a Communist Party that's able to actually have the clarity to lead the proletarian struggle for revolution. So these are big tasks, and it's not all those who consider themselves Marxists can just come together and form a Communist Party tomorrow. Definitely not. This is something that's going to take time to build. Anything that's a real Communist Party needs to be steeled in leading working class struggles, needs to have the deepest links with the masses more broadly, and especially with the working class, and especially with the industrial proletariat, which has plays a key role in the economy, in the society overall. But I think it is important to have this kind of larger view of our tasks in mind in any situation, including like the struggle that we're in right now at UPS.
Thank you so much, Audrey and Lenny. I feel like you guys have just put so much important stuff on the table for all of us to be thinking about, with both having, a clear view of what's happening right now, right in front of us at UPS, but the broader goals we as Marxists need to really be thinking about. And, we don't have any illusions that it's going to be easy to achieve these things. And we don't have a perfect ironclad plan that we're just going to mechanically follow through, but it really takes mass discussion and initiative of all of us who care about this stuff to really come together and work on it. And I appreciate all the resources folks have already been sending in the chat about, some DSA groups that are actually splitting off from the national reactionary line and taking a stand on this. And we really need to start trying to link up with those folks more and more, and seeing that, there's people everywhere in these groups that can put forward these bad lines that are looking for principled people to organize with. So it's really exciting to see kind of all the developments that are happening with that. And just pivoting it a little bit, we've had a lot of discussion about the role of Marxists more generally in the labor movement, but just to get a little bit more specific, for those of us who are Marxists but are also still students, then there's this question of what role should we be playing in this struggle, since we currently aren't workers at UPS. But again, we've had all this talk about identity politics, all these things we're told as students, where like it's not your place to like engage with the worker struggle because you aren't a worker at that workplace, which really is just about totally crushing any sort of solidarity between different sections of the masses, and really just trying to narrow who's even allowed to participate in the struggle against their exploiters, to narrower and narrower groups until it's not politically correct for anyone to struggle at all, I feel like is really the end goal of that outlook. But in RMS, we've been having some ongoing discussions about the role we see us as students playing in the struggle. And I think there's a real need for us to throw ourselves wholeheartedly into this organizing. And whether that be, showing up to picket lines and trying to talk to workers about what's going on with this contract, having broader political conversations about just, what is happening in this country right now, how are the capitalists running our country into the ground, getting at these broader political points, I think are key things we need to be doing, putting on more educational events for fellow students, for workers. But even beyond that, beyond just talking to workers, putting on events, we need to really be putting this revolutionary theory into practice when we graduate. Like activism and organizing and being revolutionaries isn't just something we're doing just because we're in college and we're young and we want to fight back because we're in our rebellious phase. Like we see this as something that we are dedicating our lives to, and we see struggle as ongoing and that won't be stopped until this whole rotten society is completely overthrown and transformed. So I think for students, when we graduate, there's a real need for us to go out and eagerly try to labor organize, whether it's in unionized workplaces with reactionary leadership like UPS, and joining in the struggles of militant workers there to overthrow the reactionary union leadership and build up more organization of labor militants within the union. Or, there's millions of workers in this country who don't even have a union at all, who don't even have reactionary union leadership to struggle against, because the union movement has just been kneecapped over the past several decades in this country. And there's a real need for us to go amongst all different strata of workers, especially those in key industries, and really take the project of labor organizing quite seriously, and with the intention of growing the revolutionary movement as well. And at least, for me as a student, it's really exciting to think about, because going into college, I thought like, okay, when I graduate, maybe I'll just go to grad school. Like I'll just get my PhD in history and be a history professor or something like that, because that's just what we're told the path is for us. Or we can go get some boring soul sucking office job that is just going to make us totally depressed. But I do think labor organizing is the real path forward for students to get more serious about the revolutionary struggle, and to really abandon those, dead end careerist goals we're taught to chase our whole lives, that really don't do anything to transform the world in the way we believe it needs to be transformed. So in my mind, that's the broader role of students, is while we're in college, eagerly studying, eagerly going amongst the people with the intention of knowing that upon graduation, we're going to continue to be involved in the struggle and even deepen our involvement through becoming workers at workplaces where we're trying to organize. And Sam, maybe if you want to break down a few more like specific calls to action right now, some things that we're already thinking make sense for workers and students to link up with, because what I just shared is still kind of some bigger picture analysis of what students should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, really just to add on to that, I think, you know, if you're a Marxist, where's your place? It's in the labor movement. If you're taking seriously, the need for revolution, there's one path towards it, and that's, really organizing in the labor movement. And, of course, there's Marxists need to be able to organize across all sectors of society, but, we need to be concentrating our forces in the labor movement within the working class. And so, I think as students, we need to see that, like, yeah, we're as Marxists, we're part of that, and we need to, be joining up with that. And frankly, it's exciting. It's exciting to hear about, the struggle that is being waged, the path forward. And for people who are kind of told, like, yeah, you're just going to sit in office, maybe climate change will just screw you over and blah, it is like, it is important for us to actually put forward an alternative, a real path forward, and to show people, look, it's not going to be easy. Getting a working class job in order to organize means that you're going to be up against all those different class forces that are fighting the working class. But at the end of the day, that's the way forward into a real socialist society. And so I guess, yeah, to get more into some of the specifics, obviously students who aren't in Teamsters, can't join up with Teamsters Mobilize, but I think we've heard from both Lenny and Audrey that for people who are Teamsters, it's super necessary to be joining that fight very directly. For those of us in RMS, as kind of Audrey already suggested, there is a real need for more propaganda, for more agitational materials to be put out there. Part of putting together this event was really to try to break through just an absolute dearth of good analysis of what is going on in UPS, and also a real lack of what the way forward is. And as RMS, we're a relatively small and new organization, and we don't see ourselves as the group that's we're in no position to be the group that's like creating a communist party, being this leading role. But as students, we can play a helping hand in actually building up a revolutionary consciousness among students going into the working class, and actually to help build up the revolutionary movement in whatever way that we can. And so we hopefully RMS can play that sort of a role, where it's able to really build up a revolutionary consciousness among students, to hopefully help to kickstart more of real student movement on the campuses, but to really learn from lessons of past student movements and some of their mistakes, and deeply integrate ourselves in the working class movement, and to really push students to see that that's the path forward. So yeah, we're going to take some time to jump into this Q&A now. And Audrey and Lenny, if you have any parting thoughts before we jump into that, feel free. I'm also going to add the RMS email in the chat, just in case people want to reach out to that. But I've really definitely appreciated talking through this with Lenny and Audrey, and being a part of this conversation. And I hope that other people have also really gotten as much from this as I have. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. I'm glad to have been able to speak here, and let's build the labor and revolutionary movement, and let's find our way out of this oppressive society. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I agree. This has been a great discussion, and yeah, it'd be great to stick around for kind of Q&A, more open discussion, maybe amongst those of us still here. I just want to say I'm very inspired and hopeful for the road ahead of us. You know, we are coming from a pretty low level of class struggle and class consciousness in the US, and that's challenging. But there is a clear way forward, and we are going to face different challenges, setbacks, defeats. We can expect that. Like with anything, you know, it's not just going to be a straight line up and up and up. But I think the important thing is we're not starting from scratch. There is a long history of class struggle around the world. I mean, and really Marxism, I think, is the synthesis of all the lessons of class struggle up until this point. And so we need to take seriously all those lessons and see how can we apply those to our current situation here and now, and go forward. And you know, I see there's some stuff in the chat like we have to have revolutionary optimism. There's so many forces bearing down upon us to make us feel like we should have no hope. We should just give up, you know, just worry about yourself, not about the people around you. Don't try to struggle, but we really have to be like fighting resolutely against that and know that we can take up these struggles. We can have a revolution. This is all possible. It's happened before in the world. It will happen again. So those are just some of my closing thoughts. But yeah, thank you very much to Sam and Ari and others at RMS for having us to speak here today.